Hello, this begins the response for Who Wrote the Bible, Part 4 of the BBC special documentary. So we just start right away here.
Syrians. They have battering rams here, a great spike on the front here. These square blocks here are probably bits of masonry from the battlements and from the structure here, raining down on the Assyrians, throwing everything at them in order to prevent their attack succeeding. The biblical account tells us that the Assyrians also went to the capital city of Jerusalem. And the biblical account tells us that for some reason the Assyrians were smitten in the night and withdrew. This was therefore taken as a great victory then for Judah and for Hezekiah. The Assyrian textual account doesn't mention Jerusalem at all. What we do know from the Assyrian sources is...
Okay, first of all, what I would suggest everyone do is to read the Assyrian account. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a link in the right-hand description, and you can look at the actual Assyrian translation yourself, and you'll see it's on the Sennacherib Prism. Is on column 3 of the prism. They do mention Jerusalem in the Assyrian inscription. I think what this scholar is trying to say here is that the mention of Jerusalem was not in connection with a defeat on their part. And there are a couple of reasons we could speculate as to why that is. One of the main lines of thought has been that there were actually 2 campaigns, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a link in the description here that you can look. It's a very good article on ancient Israel and its neighbors. Actually, this article is regarding were there 2 campaigns by Sennacherib, and the name of the article is Archaeology in the Bible at Hezekiah's Lachish. It was published in 1987, and it's a very, very good article. If you look on page 4 of that article, you will see where it starts to talk about were there 2 campaigns by Sennacherib, and there's a number of good reasons to suspect that there were. Number one, the Lachish campaign actually is not even mentioned in the Assyrian scriptures for on the Sennacherib Prism. If you look in column 3, he does talk about 46 of his strong-walled cities as well as the small towns in their area, but he makes no mention of Lachish. So, which is one reason that they believe that at this time, when this column, when the Sennacherib Prism was created, he had not yet destroyed Lachish. And it would make sense because if the Egyptian king Tirhakah had not come to reign until 690-689, and he was instrumental in joining Hezekiah, because we know from the account in 2 Kings that he talked about his use of the Egyptian chariots, and this king here is mentioned as well, Tirhakah. So it would make sense that 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 17 begins a second phase in the history. In other words, the 2 accounts were merged together. Now the speculation that they're making here in this video series is that there was one account, and it's an argument from silence. It's like saying, well, we don't have anything else to base it on, like in the Assyrian scriptures, so therefore it must be one account. No, you have to take. You can't just go by one culture or the other. You have to look at all the cultural data. You have to look at all the archaeological data and piece together what probably could have happened. And this is probably why in the account of this Assyrian record, we do not see an account of the Assyrians fleeing. So again, you want to take a look at that data. There's a lot of reading there, but I guarantee you it'll be worth it. The other reason, let me just scroll down here, page 5. There was another account found by Nadav Na'aman, and he published that in 1974. That's in the description as well. It has to do with another conquest of a city, a Philistine city. It was called Azekah. Now, all this to say that when Sennacherib published his annals in 701 BCE, the Assyrian scriptures do not mention the conquering of Lachish at all. Now there is a relief. We're looking at this relief on the in the museum here of the conquering of Lachish, which they did do. The Assyrians conquered Lachish, but we don't have the written record of them conquering Lachish. What am I saying here? Well, Lachish was their great triumph. This was this king's great triumph during his campaign. Hence the relief that he created in his palace. Now, the thing is that what we're pointing at here is that most likely Lachish was not destroyed in 701 BCE. The reason we say this is that the city is not mentioned in the Sennacherib Prism, so therefore it probably wasn't destroyed at that time. It was most likely destroyed at a later time. I just got through telling you that it's probably more likely because the Egyptian king at that time was not reigning, who came to Hezekiah's aid. And also, if we look at the biblical account, we see that Sennacherib dies at the hand of his sons. So we don't have a record of we don't have a record of the Assyrian record of his death, but we do see the record of his death in the biblical account. And most likely, as the biblical account, it seems to say that he died shortly thereafter this campaign, that it would make sense that this was around the time of his death, which was in 682 BC. Now, the speculation is as such. If Tirhathka became pharaoh in Egypt in 690 BCE, and he came to Hezekiah's aid, the impression from 2 Kings 19, verse 36 through 37, is that Sennacherib died soon after his return to Nineveh, and then that would be correct, for he died in 682 BC. So this would explain why the mention of Lachish is absent from Sennacherib's annal in 701 BCE. Remember, I said if you look in this Syrian text, you will not find the conquering of Lachish. And that's significant. And a lot of archaeologists have pointed to the fact that the relief that was created of the conquering of Lachish is evidence of the fact of a second campaign. And so, amongst other reasons, I'm not going to get into all of those, but do the reading yourself. And I think that once you read it, you will see that most likely there were 2 campaigns and not 1. And so let's take a look here at the next section.
That Hezekiah had to pay pretty hefty tribute in terms of precious vessels, gold and silver, to buy himself a little bit more time. So in reality, it was only spared because they had to buy off the Assyrians, and that's not recorded in the biblical text. That's absolutely right. There are differences.
Okay, let me just say this. That's absolutely wrong. Because the account of the tribute that Hezekiah had to pay to Sennacherib is most definitely recorded in the biblical account. So, this is very misleading. Shame on you. So, what we see here is that Hezekiah was indeed distressed. He's not painting himself out to be the hero of the day here. But if you read the account in 2 Kings, what you will see is that Hezekiah does pay tribute to the Assyrian king, and most likely that did stop the attacks on Judah and its surrounding cities at that time. But then later on, most likely Hezekiah was probably recapturing different territories, and this is when the Assyrian king comes back, and at that time most likely destroyed Lachish at that time, and then and hence the story proceeds at 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 17. There are a number of things that don't make sense. If Hezekiah pays tribute to the Assyrian king in the biblical account, why does the Assyrian king send people on further to Jerusalem if he's already been appeased? So the 2 campaign theory makes more sense to me, and also the fact that we see Hezekiah mentioning the tribute as well. There's no surprise there. If you read the biblical account, you'll see that he mentions the tribute, and this is a very misleading statement made by this commentator here. We'll just move on.
There are issues with spin, and in one case the Assyrians need it for their purposes. They are putting this all over their palace. They're not mentioning what happened to Jerusalem. As far as the Judahites are concerned, they needed this to turn it into a great victory, so that Hezekiah comes out as the great champion.
Okay, he says there are issues of spin at work here. And I would have to agree. I'd have to say, well, I'm not going to say he's spinning it, but he has an opinion. He has a belief that the Assyrian account is an account of one campaign. I've just told you a number of things that I have issue with that, and that is that, number one, there is no mention of the conquering of Lachish in the Assyrian account. Again, you want to read the Assyrian account, go to the description, and you read column 3. You're not going to see the city of Lachish mentioned in there. Okay? And you're not going to see where Lachish was destroyed. As I said, there's a mention of some cities, some strong-walled cities, some small towns in their area. Now he mentions Jerusalem. If he mentions Jerusalem, why doesn't he mention Lachish? Those are the two biggest cities. That's why he built this relief. Okay, he built this relief of the conquering of Lachish, and so the significance is, if it was so important to build a relief about, why didn't he write about it? Well, one speculative answer would be because at the time of this writing, he had not yet conquered Lachish. Hence, we speculate there were two campaigns. And then it would make sense that the account of them fleeing Jerusalem would not be mentioned here. So, moving on.
All this was more than 2,000 years ago. The Bible's promoting Hezekiah's Judaism, but it's not the Judaism we know today. It's already a...
Okay, so he says all this, he's talking about that Judaism has changed since the time of Hezekiah. Judaism is not what it was in the days of Hezekiah. Okay, so this is his what he's come to here, and it's based on his belief in the documentary assumption. His belief that Israel was a polytheistic nation at one time. His belief that Hezekiah centralized worship, which is a lot of assumptions to make. There's a lot of circular reasoning going on there. You look for some foundational aspect of it, and it just all keeps referring back to, well, there was polytheism, and centralization of worship, and the names of God point to other gods. You can look at some of my other explanations in the previous 3 videos, but needless to say, we're going to come into more of this in this video of centralization of worship.
He really cleaned the temple and got rid of all the popular elements. But still, it's not Judaism, of course, the way we practice it here in this synagogue. What's surprisingly modern is the system of tithes or taxes which supported the...
So now we're getting into this tithing, and this is all based on centralization of worship. There's an article I'm going to put in the link here on centralization of worship. Not going to talk too much more about that.
There are passages in Deuteronomy that suggest if people pay their tithes and have their sacrifices in Jerusalem, that God will bless them. Is that part of the...
Okay, he says there are passages in Deuteronomy that suggest that if they pay their tithes in Jerusalem, what the point is that he says there are passages that suggest, and again, this is all based on his documentary assumption. Again, he's looking at Deuteronomy as a Deuteronomic source, and it's all based on documentary assumption.
Theology of centralizing the cult. Yes, of course. Look, the people who wanted to promote the Deuteronomistic ideology, of course, that's their way to convince the people that that's the way for them to become blessed. So the Old Testament writers made it clear, pay service to the temple and God would see you right.
Okay, so he draws another conclusion, and he just keeps building on this faulty foundation of his documentary assumption. So what more could I say than I don't agree with that view, and if you want to look up more on why I feel that the documentary hypothesis is unfounded, you can look at the links in my other videos. Check out video number 3. Look in the links.
This ancient bargain is still a powerful force in religion today. Like many evangelical churches, the Ruach Foundation in Brixton put a lot of emphasis on giving money to the church, just as the Old Testament says, and on the rewards which will result. 2004 is the year of the open door. I shall keep on decreeing until you go through your open door. Everything that God promised you, you shall have. The Bible commends us and commands us to give. And when it says give, it actually says that something will come back to you. You know, it shall be given back to you. You should press down, shake it together, and run it over with full measure shall it be given back to you. So there is a spiritual implication in giving that we are obeying God's word. And in doing so, not only is it spiritual, but it becomes very practical as well. But there's a difference between Brixton and Hezekiah's Jerusalem cult. In Brixton, religious practice isn't the main thing. It's about giving of yourself.
Okay, I'm not sure where he's going with all this tithing and stuff like this, but it's interesting how he jumps from this very Jewish worldview and he jumps into this, you know, Pentecostal charismatic church environment. You know, he's trying to draw some parallel there, but in my opinion, there's a lot more to be addressed than just jumping through there. But he does say Hezekiah's Jerusalem cult. So he's already designated Hezekiah's Jerusalem cult. So in other words, monotheism is cultish? Is that what he's saying? Or the fact that Hezekiah abolished all other idolatry, or actually enforced. I mean, it was the law of God not to worship other idols, and Hezekiah just enforces that. And so all of a sudden Hezekiah has a Jerusalem cult because he's enforcing what he believes to be the law of God. Well, no, because according to this scholar, and according to many academic theologians, why, monotheism is a newer idea. And the Torah was put together from 4 main schools of thought. And polytheism was the norm in early Israel. And all of these assumptions really need to be looked at closer because they're not really founded on good scholarship.
Giving of your time, giving of your expertise, as well as putting money into the offering plate. Now that idea of salvation through sacrifice wasn't in Hezekiah's Bible, but it would get there.
Oh, he says the idea of salvation through sacrifice wasn't in Hezekiah's Bible. Really? Well, if you read the Torah, you will see the concept of salvation through sacrifice. You will see that Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery by his brothers, ultimately became the savior of his family. If you look at the nation of Israel being rescued from the land of the Egyptians, what is it that they did on the night of Passover? They sacrificed a lamb, and they put the blood on the doors so that when the angel of death passed over, they would be spared, they would be saved. So we have this host here saying, oh, the idea of salvation from sacrifice was not in Hezekiah's Bible? Well, no. Not according to this academic theologian and other academic theologians. Again, I'll tell you. Why, those stories weren't in there. It was all fabricated much later on. Which is kind of a hard thing to prove, since most of the prophets, such as Isaiah, Amos, Jeremiah, all these prophets that assume these stories were there as they're giving their prophecies. Now we could go into these bit by bit, but suffice it to say that the documentary assumption cannot be upheld in the radical manner in which this host is trying to uphold it. All we could do is address each specific point as he brings it forward.
Because there was yet another rewrite of the Bible to come, and this one was based on a disaster that took place in the late 7th century BC.
Okay, so now he says, oh, there's one more rewrite of the Bible. Now, again, I'm going to say this. He says, rewrite of the Bible. But what we're dealing with here, folks, is the Torah. The first 5 books of the Bible. What is known as the law. And he says that this rewrite took place in the late 7th century. So, basically he's saying, oh, okay, Moses is dated to the 14th century, but those first 5 books weren't actually completely written until the late 7th century. You know, over 700 years after the time of Moses. You know, during that time that they've just been continually updated and rewritten, and oh, by golly, we don't have any archaeological proof of this, but we just know by looking at the text, and we can tell that you know, we can interpret it. We're judging it to be so. So again, let's move on.
After Hezekiah, another king, Josiah, became the great hope for the Jews. In 609 BC, he came here to Megiddo, known then as Armageddon. The word has survived since because of the fateful meeting between Josiah and Necho, the Egyptian pharaoh. We don't know exactly what happened here, and we don't know exactly where it happened. But the fact of the matter is that the meeting ended in a very tragic way, because Necho simply killed Josiah and Megiddo. That was a terrible blow for Judah and for the ideology of the biblical authors. King Josiah, the most righteous king in the history of Judah, according to their description, the center of the hopes for a revival of all Israel, for the revival of the great taking of the past and so on, was slaughtered here at Megiddo all of a sudden, and everything collapsed. In less than a generation, Jerusalem and its temple would be destroyed and the population exiled. So the Bible had a new job to do. It had to offer hope for the future.
Okay, so he says the Bible had a new job to do. It had to offer hope for the future. I think that the Word of God has always had that in mind. And I think that if you were to look at any sacred scripture from any people, you're going to see that hope is a central topic of our belief. And so he says, oh, the Bible has this new job now. It needs to provide hope for the future. So, again, there's this assumption that it's up to the people who are writing the Bible to come up with this hope. In other words, it's not God, it's not God inspiring men. It's not God acting upon the prophets, to give hope. Why, no, it's just the Bible. The Bible had a job to do. It had to give hope. And so we continue to see this anti-supernaturalistic worldview. So we'll just continue.
This is the moment at the beginning of Messianism, and the idea that the next righteous king of the lineage of David will come back from the same place, but the last one was slaughtered by Nadav. So the idea of Armageddon starts here, 609 BC.
So he says the idea of Armageddon starts in 609 BC. Now this is based on a documentary assumption regarding the book of Isaiah, where they split the book of Isaiah up into 3 different sections. And they say that there was an Isaiah school of writers. And in fact, the book of Isaiah wasn't written by Isaiah throughout the entire book at all. It was written by him only for up to the first 39 chapters or something like that. And the rest of it was written by other people, throughout this period of time, from the late 7th century to 609 BCE, from the Isaiah school. And then it was pieced together, So again, there's a lot of reading if you want to get into that. But it's all based on this idea that why Isaiah couldn't prophesy these things because they didn't happen yet, And so, therefore, it must have been written by somebody later, But I'm not going to cover that too much. We can get into a long study on that. I'll see if I can find some links and put them in the right-hand side there. What I'm basically saying is this, though. If Isaiah was writing about Armageddon in the late 7th century, then no, it would not be dated to 609 BCE. It would be dated later, the idea of Armageddon. And even more than that, we could speculate on other dates, but let's move on.
No longer were the Jews in control of their own land. They were exiles, suffering servants. But their Bible continued to evolve, now prophesying the Messiah and the new world he would bring. The Old Testament we know today was finally taking shape.
Okay, so he's talking about the Old Testament finally taking shape. He's referring to the rest of the books now, the prophets and the writings.
The population of Israel today is some 6 million. A high proportion of first-generation immigrants. Since 1989 alone, more than 1 million people have become new Israeli citizens. But most Israelis don't regard themselves as plain immigrants. They are, they say, exiles returning.
Okay, so he says, most Israelis don't regard themselves as immigrants. They regard themselves as returning from exile. And he says this why, how dare they consider themselves exiles? They're nothing but immigrants. again, you see this viewpoint here coming through. And I hate to say that it's a certain viewpoint. I'm not going to say it. But you will see comments like this more so from this point forward.
To their promised land. This is not the first time Jews have returned to the Holy Land. In 516 BC, after more than 50 years in exile in Babylon, Jews returned to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Today, what remains of the temple is the object of veneration for religious Israelis. This place is full of contradictions. You've got a wall and people treating it as sacred ground, feeling that their God is present here. Yet we're told that the same God doesn't dwell in temples made by human hands.
Okay, now he's just making comments like not even thinking about what he's saying here. He's saying, oh boy, this place is filled with contradictions. You know, you got a wall here and people are treating this Wailing Wall like it's sacred, and you know, they're giving it its veneration, and you know, like God is dwelling here, and yet God says that I will not dwell in temples. But you think these Orthodox Jews, do you think these Jews don't know that? You know, it's like, have a little respect for people who are in prayer. You know, he's making it out to be strange or something. Okay, so anyway.
It's a place of devotion, deep, profound religious devotion, yet with soldiers against the wall with their guns praying.
Okay, now he's saying, you know, this place is of deep devotion, and yet there's soldiers with their guns there. You know what? If you lived in a nation that was surrounded by your enemies, I don't think that you would see the contradiction there. And by the way, I just need to throw this out. It's not like, well, I'm not going to say anymore, but I'm just saying, it's not like there haven't been soldiers all over the entire world that haven't prayed with a gun in their hand or a gun over their shoulder in their lives. You know, and the fact that the soldier's praying, I mean, you should. I'm not going to say anymore.
Could you imagine that happening in the church? People bringing weapons into a church to pray to God.
So now he says, could you imagine people bringing weapons into a church to pray to God? Like that's the form of worship. Like, oh wait, before I run off to church, let me grab my gun. I don't want to go to church without my gun. No, there's there's a reason that the soldier has a gun, and the reason the soldier is there is for protection. You know, and he's making this out just, to me, this is like the most insignificant thing that he could be discussing right now in regard to who wrote the Bible.
A place of incredible contrasts and tensions. Modern Zionism relies on the Bible.
Okay, so there we have it. He says modern Zion relies on the Bible. So this is what it's all about. He just cannot wait to just talk about Zionism. You know, is that what we're going to talk about? All right, let's go.
As the book of Jeremiah foretold the return of the original exiles from Babylon, so the Bible's promises lie behind the establishment of the Israeli state. The experience of exile transformed Jewish identity, but it also changed the Old Testament. In 516,
all right, so he likes to use this word change, and rewrote, and, you know, so he's like, oh, it changed the Old Testament. Yeah, according to his view, according to his documentarian view.
The final rewrite of the Bible begins. It contains material written in exile far from the land of Israel, and it deals with the themes of suffering and affliction.
Alright, so that ends video number 4. He says that we're getting into the final rewrite of the Bible according to the documentarian theory. And he says it deals with suffering. So we're going to get into that in the next video. Alright, God bless.